Sometimes the smallest countries on the map have the most epic stories to tell. That's why we're zooming in on a place that's tiny but mighty, sitting right on one of the world's most critical sea lanes, Djibouti. It's a country that's been a meeting point for ancient trade, a battleground for colonial ambition, and a nexus of modern geopolitics. Trust me, the history here is a wild, chronologically satisfying ride. First off, we have to talk about Djibouti's ancient past. This place has been settled for ages. Archaeological finds from cool pottery to rock art show a long-standing human presence. Now, because of its strategic location, right across the Gulf of Aden from the Arabian Peninsula, this area became a perfect stop for early Arab traders. And what did they bring? The one and only Islam. It was introduced around 825 AD, and the territory was soon governed by various local sultanates. Also, before we even get to the modern state, this land was primarily inhabited by nomadic Cushitic tribes, specifically the Afars and the Issas, which are both essential to our story. So keep them in mind. In the meantime, let's fast forward 1,000 years to the mid-19th century. Europe is going through the scramble for Africa. And guess what becomes a hot commodity? The entrance to the Red Sea, thanks to the Suez Canal opening. Suddenly, this little spot becomes valuable. So while the British focused on Egypt and Sudan, the French saw their chance. They formally established their presence in 1884 to 1885, with the creation of the protectorates of Obok and Tajura, eventually grouping them together into the colony known as French Somaliland in 1888. Then, in 1892, the capital moved to a sleepy little port, which they named, you guessed it, Djibouti. To make this port a true economic powerhouse, they needed a lifeline to the interior. So, between 1897 and 1917, they built the narrow-gauge railway connecting the port of Djibouti all the way to Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. This railway cemented Djibouti's role as the primary outlet for Ethiopian trade, which is a big deal even today. Now, things started getting political after World War II. In 1946, Djibouti became an overseas territory within the French Union, gaining its own legislature. And they actually held 2 votes where they opted to stick with France. First in 1958 to join the French community, and again in 1967 in a tense referendum. After that 1967 vote, the colony got a new, more descriptive name, the French Territory of the Afars and the Issas. This renaming highlights the growing political importance of those 2 key ethnic groups we mentioned earlier. And despite the votes to stay, the tide of independence was rising across Africa. The Issa community began pushing hard for independence, while a significant portion of the Afar community favoured remaining a French territory, partly due to France's policy of favouring them and the fear of being dominated by the Issas. But eventually, under the pressure of the Organisation of African Unity, or OAU, the 2 groups came together in a unified movement. Then, finally, on June 27th, 1977, the French territory of the Afars and the Issas became the independent Republic of Djibouti. But the unity didn't last long. In 1981, Hassan Gould Abtidon, the first president from the Issa group, banned all other political parties, making Djibouti a one-party state. This move naturally fueled resentment, especially among the Afars, who felt marginalised by the Issa-dominated government. This dissatisfaction boiled over in 1991 with the formation of the Afar Armed Opposition Group, the Front for the Restoration of Unity and Democracy, or FRUD for short. Then, a full-blown civil war erupted in the northeast, forcing the government to allow a limited multi-party system in 1992. The civil war was brutal, but it mostly wrapped up between 1994 and 2000. The government and a moderate faction of FRUD signed a power-sharing agreement in 1994, and the last radical faction finally signed a peace deal in 2000. But just before that final peace accord, a major transition happened in 1999. President Abtidon retired, and his nephew, Ismail Omar Guelleh, was elected president, continuing the one party's hold on power. So that's the history. Next up, we need to understand the geography that makes this place so ridiculously valuable. Are you ready to see what the land itself looks like? Djibouti is a Lilliputian-sized country. That means tiny. And it's located right on the northeast coast of the Horn of Africa. It covers about 23,200 square kilometres, or about 9,000 square miles. It's bordered by Eritrea to the north, Ethiopia to the west and south, and Somalia to the southeast. But the real neighbours are maritime. Not only that, but Djibouti is also situated right on the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a ridiculously crucial waterway. The name literally means Gate of Tears in Arabic, which hints at the dangers of navigation in the past. This strait is the choke point that connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden and the wider Indian Ocean. Think of it. Any ship going from Europe through the Suez Canal to Asia, or vice versa, has to pass by Djibouti. That makes its deepwater port in Djibouti City the primary lifeline for landlocked Ethiopia's trade, and a crucial refueling and transshipment hub for global commerce. It's what gives this tiny country its gigantic geopolitical weight, which we'll talk more about later on. But for now, let's talk about the land itself, because it is wild. Djibouti is not just a country, it's a living, breathing geology lab. It sits at the Afar Triple Junction, which is where three of Earth's major tectonic plates, the African Nubian, Somali, and Arabian plates, are slowly but constantly pulling apart. So, what does that mean on the ground? It means the crust is thin, the land is bare, dry, and volcanic. The terrain is mostly a harsh, stony desert, covered in centuries-old lava rock, with sharp cliffs, ravines, and burning sands. They even get over 600 tiny, unnoticeable tremors a year. Still, this tectonic tension gives us two of the country's most spectacular features. First up, there's Lac Assel, which is Africa's lowest point. This place is a natural phenomenon. It's 10 times saltier than the ocean, giving it an incredible ethereal blue colour against a blinding white salt crust, all surrounded by picturesque volcanic hills. Honestly, it truly looks like something from another planet. Then, on the opposite end of the spectrum, up in the northern region, the high desert plateau rises to the country's tallest peak, Mount Musa Ali, which stands a little over 2,000 metres, or about 6,654 feet. Oh, and it's a mountain border shared with Ethiopia and Eritrea. Beyond these extremes, you can also find a pocket of green in the north, the Forêt du Dai on Mount Goda. This small national park is a last vestige of a forest that once covered the area and hosts rare plants and animals, like monkeys and antelopes. Alright, at this point we've seen the history, we've also seen the geography. Now let's see the system that runs it and how it manages to make bank, despite having almost no natural resources. So what does the political landscape look like in modern Djibouti? Well, long story short, it's a presidential republic, but one where power is heavily centralised. The main man is President Ismail Omar Guelleh, often known as IOG. His rule is underpinned by the People's Rally for Progress, or the RPP party, which dominates the ruling coalition, the Union for a Presidential Majority, or UMP. That's why the political system is often described as authoritarian, with critics and opposition parties facing severe constraints. For example, in the last legislative elections, the UMP coalition took the overwhelming majority of seats in the National Assembly. President Guelleh himself was re-elected for a fifth term in 2021 with an astonishing 97% of the vote, largely due to the opposition boycotting the election. And right now, the government's stability rests on two key pillars: the backing of the armed forces and the international support it receives. Which brings us to the economic side of things. So Djibouti is a country of around 1.18 million people, and it has virtually no natural resources, making it highly dependent on imports for food. So how does it survive and, in some ways, thrive? The answer's simple: services, services, services. Djibouti's economy is almost entirely driven by the service sector, primarily its port and logistics activities, which account for over 76% of its GDP, which totals to $4.09 billion in 2024. In fact, the real GDP growth was recently revised up to 6.0% for 2024, driven by a phenomenal surge in port traffic. This surge was due to global shipping companies diverting routes away from the Red Sea conflict zone, causing transshipment volumes to spike by a massive 239.5% year-on-year. This temporary boom is essentially a windfall from global instability, underscoring the government's long-term focus on key investment sectors like transport and logistics, real estate, and energy. But this economic model is a high-stakes balancing act, and the biggest risk is its heavy dependence on its landlocked neighbour, Ethiopia, for trade, meaning any instability there or a shift in trade routes to a rival port like Berbera in Somaliland could be devastating. What's more, the current growth is precarious. Once the Red Sea conflict stabilises and shipping lanes reopen, Djibouti could face a sharp reversal in port activity. And even though the economy is growing, that growth hasn't solved all of Djibouti's social problems just yet. Unemployment is persistently high, especially among the youth, though there has been progress in reducing extreme poverty, with the share of people living under the international poverty line falling to an expected 14.5% in 2024. But on the bright side, thanks to the country's currency being pegged to the US dollar, inflation has remained modest, averaging only 2.2% in 2024. Ultimately, Djibouti is a geopolitical entrepreneur selling access and stability to the world to fuel its economy. It's a tiny player making decisions that ripple across global trade and security, but it remains vulnerable to the shifting tides of regional conflict and global commerce. But the story's not over yet, because we have yet to unpack the most crucial piece of Djibouti's puzzle, their culture. The heart of Djibouti's culture is its people, predominantly the two great ethnic groups we mentioned in the history section, the Isa Somali and the Afar. They have traditionally been nomadic pastoralists, but as the capital grew, most residents now live in urban areas, creating a unique blend of nomadic tradition, French colonial influence, and deep Islamic faith. And because of its centuries-old ties to the Arabian Peninsula, Islam is the official religion and a profound component of daily life, with about 94% of the population adhering to the Sunni branch. This guides many of the country's most important celebrations, such as the Muslim feasts and holidays like Eid al-Fitr, which marks the end of Ramadan, and Dal Adha, which culminates the Hajj pilgrimage. Of course, the country's biggest secular party is Independence Day, celebrated every year on June 27th. Now, when it comes to style, Djiboutian fashion is a perfect response to the blistering climate. While Western clothes like jeans and t-shirts are common in the city, traditional wear is still king. For men, you'll often see them in a sarong-like garment called a futa or makawiz, which is both comfortable and practical. Women, on the other hand, wear the beautiful dairak, a long, light, diaphanous voile dress, often paired with a colourful shawl or headscarf. But if you want to see this fashion in action, head to the capital's central market, or souk, which is famous for its multicoloured textiles, jewellery, and handicrafts from the nomadic tribes. Speaking of the capital, Djibouti City is a genuinely fascinating stop for anyone who loves food. The local cuisine is a delicious fusion of its influences, African spices from the Horn and the refinement of French cooking. You can easily find meals that include things like spicy oven-baked fish, roast lamb with delicate yogurt sauce, lentil stew, and flatbread. But the city's cosmopolitan nature, thanks to its status as an international hub, means you don't stop there. The capital also has high-quality Vietnamese, Chinese, and Lebanese restaurants, making it a surprisingly remote but rewarding destination for foodies. So, grab a meal, maybe sip some fruit juice, and just soak in the scene. And now that you have a glimpse of their story, from history to geography to politics to economy to culture, what part of Djibouti would you like to explore further? Or maybe you've discovered other interesting aspects of Djibouti that I missed out. If so, let me know in the comments down below. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, you'll definitely love this next one.